Thank you, Mr. Chair. My first question for Ms. Soper. Are you aware that over 30 churches were burned down in Canada in 2021?
Yes, I am.
And can you answer, is public safety currently investigating the burning of over 30 churches in Canada last year?
Public safety does not have an investigative mandate that might be better directed towards our CMP.
But you said in your testimony that you were given a mandate by this government in 2021 to bring IMVE perpetrators to justice, and now you're saying you don't have a mandate to investigate? Sure.
Well, we are not the police of jurisdiction for investigations into IMVE, so I might defer that question to my colleagues on the policing side.
Okay, so if you're not doing an investigation, are you doing anything about the 30 churches that were burned down in 2021?
Again, I can't speak to what the nature of any investigation might be occurring in relation to those horrible events, but I would defer the question to our CMP, who may be police of jurisdiction in relation to some of those.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to CSIS, Ms. Chair. I have a copy of your 2021 CSIS report, and it lists off a lot of ideologically motivated violent extremist examples, but there's not one example of 30 churches being burned down in Canada last year. Why has that not been included in your CSIS public report?
Thank you very much for the question. However, my organization is the Integrated Threat Assessment Center. I think your question is probably more for my colleague, Mrs. Anderson.
Okay, but are you saying that it's not a threat? That 30 churches were burned down in Canada last year? This isn't under your purview? This isn't a terrorist attack?
So if you allow me to explain just a little bit the mandate of my organization and how we come up with threat assessment. So ITAC is responsible to evaluate the threat, and we do that according to a very detailed methodology. We look at the intent, the opportunities, and the capabilities of potential threat actors, and we do that.
Don't believe that these 30 church burnings posed a threat.
So if I may, sir, we do our assessment based on collected intelligence by other organizations. And so when we provide
so you have any
our
intelligence about the 30 church burnings?
Sir, I really think that I am not the best person to answer that question.
I just find it interesting because you do have extensive stuff in your public report about ideologically motivated extremism, religiously motivated extremism, politically motivated extremism, and yet 30 churches being burned down in Canada last year didn't merit a mention. I also note on page 30 of your report that says CSIS continues to engage with community leaders, members, and advocacy groups to offer support and solidarity and to reinforce the Government of Canada position that there is no place in Canada for racial prejudice, discrimination, and hate. Can you tell us if CSIS has ever reached out to show support and solidarity with the 30 church communities that were burned down in Canada in 2021?
I would defer to my CSIS colleague.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. What I will say is that the service is always extremely concerned with any violent form of extremist activity. In this case, that had already gone into the criminal realm, and so the RCMP may have further comments. What we are always doing is trying to get out ahead and see if we can determine where the threat is coming from in advance of those horrendous sorts of activities.
Of course,
absolutely, the burning.
But your report,
sorry,
your report does talk about a lot of things that happened in the past. So clearly, you're not just talking about the future. You have talked about terrorist attacks happening since 2014, ideologically motivated violent extremism. And yet, in 2021, there's not a single mention in your public report about 30 churches being burned down in this country.
Well, what we are trying to do is make sure that we understand the underlying threat so that we can try and prevent that sort of activity happening into the future. And we definitely are always very concerned about any serious acts of violence that can impact the national security of our country.
So can you tell me, yes or no, has CSIS reached out to show support and solidarity to the 30 church communities that had their churches burned down last year? Yes or no?
I can't speak to certain investigations that may be ongoing, but what I can do is say that we are definitely concerned with any acts of violence that impact the national security and could threaten
Don't know if
Canadians.
you've reached out to show support and solidarity.
I can't speak to what may be happening in the operational space in an unclassified environment.
Okay, well, it would have been nice to have a statement of at least concern for these communities from CSIS, considering the fact that at 4 a.m. in the morning in my town of Morinville, over 50 people had to be evacuated from their homes because a church was burned down, and there was a massive threat that a senior's home, apartments were going to be burned to the ground. It was only due to the heroism of 50 local volunteer firefighters that this blaze was brought under control. This could have been one of the highest potential mass casualty terrorist event on Canadian soil in our modern history, and yet it doesn't seem to have merited a single mention by our security services. So I want to put that on the record. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Lloyd.